Hello, everyone. My name is Eleftherios, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Radicle project, which is a sovereign code collaboration stack. I couldn't start my presentation differently rather than saying that we actually living in turbulent times. I believe that we're living in times of social unrest. And while I don't think that technology provide any complete solutions to any social problems, I believe that technology can be part of a solution. And I really think that at this point, it's actually quite important that we go back to the technology that brought a lot of renewed interest on the space, which is Bitcoin, and remind ourselves that actually decentralization is not the end goal. Decentralization is a means for social change, and that's the ultimate goal. I believe that this is important to keep that in mind before actually discussing any potential technologies. Moving towards the work that we're doing with Radicle, the Radicle project started with this belief that code collaboration, infrastructure, and code is becoming the foundation of our society. Everything, pretty much every organization in the world depends on some form of code, and many times open source code for its own operations. And for that reason, we at Radicle believe that we need resilient infrastructures. While the key word on the Web 2.0 world was convenience, we really believe that this next iteration of the internet needs to focus much more on resilience. You might be wondering already, what's the problem with code collaboration stack? Like, you might be already thinking about, some of these platforms that you use today that look great. But in practice, at Radicle, we really think that there are certain fundamental challenges to our code collaboration infrastructure. And concretely, the first challenge that we see is we describe it as the case for sovereignty, if you wish. Unfortunately, today, the world's open source infrastructure is hosted in a US-based for-profit company. And while I personally don't believe that, a corporation is evil, unfortunately, a corporation actually has to follow, in this case, US trade sanctions, and unfortunately has to actually restrict usage to certain developers from certain areas, or to actual projects that receive contributions for certain areas. And if you really believe that open source actually has to be open, then we believe that we actually have to do this better. And if you're thinking that actually this theoretical argument, this is the case in practice today in a lot of different parts of the world, like Syria, Crimea, and Iran, for example. And we've seen this case coming up again and again, and we actually believe that these things will get worse. And if you really think about this also, if you also really think about the fact that platforms like GitHub or GitLab have really become the place where a developer can actually prove their work to the commons, right? They can prove their contributions, or they can prove their maintenance. The problem actually becomes even more significant when you have cases where someone's life's work actually is being removed suddenly, from the internet without them having any ability to dispute. So that's one very concrete problem that we're taking on with Radicle. Another problem is what we describe as the case for security. So for the old-timers that have been using or have seen the internet in its earlier phases, you probably remember that especially at the first version of the internet, security was an afterthought. The internet was primarily created as a network of researchers, and not so much as a network for businesses, if you wish. And because of that, because of security being an afterthought, and specifically moving from Web 1 to Web 2, where we started seeing the more classic client-server model and more like classic login systems where the corporation owns your identity, we started seeing a lot of different problems around security. This is, without going into much detail, this is one of the main reasons why probably the biggest open source project in the world, the Linux kernel, is actually not using GitHub. And this is also the reason why one of the other bigger projects, Bitcoin Core, probably the second biggest project in open source in the world, has also engineered all sorts of different basically workflows around GitHub in order to be able to prove that every every commit, every interaction comes from a trusted maintainer, from a set of keys from a trusted maintainer. And this is also the reason why we're seeing basically, basically security leaks and breaches are the one after the other. And attacks actually have been getting even more sophisticated, while previously we used to see like attacks that would primarily be focused in taking over someone's account. Now we basically see more sophisticated attacks where basically, certain attackers take over an account and then start impersonating the maintainer around the social interactions. So it's not just the code, but it's also about the social interactions. And we really think that Web3 actually, offers possibility to do something much better by completely redesigning some of these architectures. Finally, the last problem that I would like to call out and has been a major focus for us in Radicle is the case for sustainability. This problem has been extensively discussed, I believe, the last few years, but still a significant portion of the open source software that we all use has no financial incentives or has no business model, if you wish. Specifically, like when you're focusing more on libraries or frameworks, a very significant part of the web. Unfortunately, there, when you zoom in a bit deeper, you see maintainers basically voluntarily doing work, many times very frustrated, while a bunch of different actors are actually, making money depending on them. So we really believe that we can do better, and we really believe that cryptocurrencies and Web3 offer new possibilities for new value flows towards developers. So these are the three different problems that Radicle is trying to address. Our vision with Radicle is to bring forward the most secure and sustainable way to build software together. And in comparison to some of the existing status quo, GitHub, which is the de facto solution today, is focused on convenience, but comes with a weak security model, comes with a very limited incentivization offering for open source sustainability. It's bound by US trade sanctions, and unfortunately, it's closed source. You cannot actually modify this. You cannot, hack your own workflows if you wish. And then the new player in the space, GitLab, is much more focused towards the enterprise and has some of the similar challenges with GitHub. So what we're doing with Radicle is focusing on sovereignty, and our goal is basically to bring forward a free and open source solution that is peer-to-peer and a design with security and sustainability in mind from the get-go. Concretely, zooming in towards the value proposition of Radicle. In Radicle, as I mentioned, we're using secure identities, all artifacts, not just your code, but also social artifacts like code reviews and issues are all cryptographically signed. And Radicle is fundamentally peer-to-peer. There's no need to trust anyone with your data, actually, and also there's no need for you to, setting up your own hosting if you wish. In addition, Radicle is bringing forward a very different paradigm, like a paradigm of local first or offline first, if you wish, where all your data, including your code, your issues, your comments, your code reviews, live local in your machine and are available always offline. And specifically, this property is actually allowing us to do some very interesting things as the computation is happening locally, and that gives us certain performance and security benefits that are not available, that are not possible today in some of these competing technologies. In addition, Radicle uses blockchains specifically for persistent sovereign identity, an identity that's always yours. We call it your new private property. And it also takes that concept and extends that to organizations. This is something that within Radicle we call sovereign collectives, where basically you have the ability to actually create an organization that is truly collaborative. It can have its own governance, and it's truly collaborative. You can actually engineer many new interesting flows of collaboration around that. Finally, as I mentioned before, Radicle is also bringing a differentiated offering, specifically trying to help developers basically capture value around the work and sustain their living. All of this is not, just some theory project. Actually, we launched the proof of concept in 2019 that generated a lot of attention on the internet. You can still see that early version under alpha.radical.xyz, although right now we actually working on refactoring a lot of that work and bringing forward a stable release actually later this year. For the ones of you that enjoy more like of a visual take on the project, here you see some of the screenshots. I couldn't post a video, but you can start getting a feel of some of the work that we're doing on the application layer. And in the application layer, you have things that you used to. You have the things that you used to, like code browsing or code sharing or issues or code reviews. But the whole thing runs behind the scenes based on a secure peer-to-peer architecture where you can track different projects or different maintainers and basically interact with them in a peer-to-peer way without really compromising so much of your convenience, if you wish. In addition, as I mentioned before, here what you see on the left is some of our flows specifically around what I call the sovereign collectives. And here we're giving the ability to maintainers to basically start a sovereign collective, which is very similar to a GitHub organization. You can think of it as similar to a GitHub organization, but this time you actually have the ability to engineer more interesting and more collaborative flows or governance flows, if you wish. Here, the one example that we're showing basically shows you that you can run your project like having a benevolent dictator, which is the common model that you see today on Web 2.0 platforms, like one super user, one admin to rule them all. But also, if you want to do something more interesting, then, for example, you can engineer a scheme where the governance of the project is actually managed by a quorum and requires a set of maintainers to collectively, for example, agree before adding or removing a member, or before changing the license, or any other interaction, if you wish. So that's what you see on the left. Now, what you see on the right is also some of our first value flows, specifically around sustainability. And the core idea that we are bringing forward there is we want to allow developers to issue digital assets within the Radicle network, and basically distribute them to some of their sponsors, some of their members, in order to finance their operations. To give you something more concrete, we're working on ideas specifically around premium issue trackers or support, or basically, like other type of access tokens, or even potentially digital representations of software licenses. Finally, to complete the whole flow, after you start an organization, you start having an income from some of your supporters. Also here, we're leveraging blockchains in order to actually create programmatic and automatic value flows within your community, but also with members outside your community, like your dependents. For example, you can program certain interactions where 10% of your income every month is automatically distributed to your maintainers, and then 20% of it is, for example, distributed to your dependencies if you want to be a good citizen within the open source ecosystem. Finally, for the ones of you that wondering how does the whole system work behind the scenes, I think it's important to call out that there are three fundamental components. At the core of it, there's a peer-to-peer protocol that is based on Git. It actually uses Git as the storage layer, but instead of only storing commits there, you have things like issues and code review in Git. And then what we're doing with Radicle is basically on the peer-to-peer layer, we're introducing a new peer discovery and replication layer, if you wish, that allows you to communicate and collaborate much more easily than what you can do today with like the standard Git model. And this model already gives you things like code browsing, code sharing, issues, code reviews in the peer-to-peer protocol. In addition, we're also building a blockchain-based registry. I would call this the Radicle registry, that acts as the canonical source, the global view, if you wish, within that network, and also allows us to provide things like persistent sovereign identity, sovereign collectives that I spoke to in the past, and also the ability to issue digital assets and create new ways for projects to actually finance their operations. Finally, we also developing a decentralized application as well that runs locally and exposes these two protocols. This is one client that we engineering, and we're very happy with our work there. But obviously, any client can emerge, and we believe that more clients will eventually emerge around these two protocols. As I mentioned before, our beta is coming this summer, and we're really excited for that. It has been quite some time in the making. Please, if you want to follow the project, please follow Radicle XYZ on Twitter. And I also will be hosting a Q&A session later. So if you have any questions, I would love to see you there. Thank you so much.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.